Good morning. Welcome to Struggles of the Spirit. I'm your host, the Reverend Leland Udell, and I'm glad you've tuned into the program today. We're continuing our delving into people's earliest memories of their relationship with God, on whatever level that relationship might be. Obviously, when we're talking about childhood, beginning with childhood, it's not a very intellectual kind of knowledge, and in some ways an intellectual knowledge is probably the worst thing to try to know God, or to know anyone else for that matter, a best friend or future spouse, and so then we're going to look at that as we have been doing with our other guests up to the present day, and every individual is unique, thank goodness. We're all different. And we have a different history, a different pattern to our lives, and that's the way it should be, because it would be rather boring if we were all identical, each of us the same. So we have a gentleman who's been on the program here a number of times before with me, Dr. Richard Doze, a psychotherapist here in Burlington, and also a person who's very much knowledgeable, not only as a scholar, but as a practitioner of Buddhism. So he's going to talk with us about his path of how he got to know God or didn't get to know God, as the case may be, because there are people who say, I just never have had a chance to meet God. And they don't mean that sarcastically or with a sense of humor, honestly. And I think we have to be honest in these kind of conversations, because otherwise we're just wasting everyone's time. Now, this program, as you may remember, is public access, which means you can phone in to us, and we delight in your phoning in to us anytime during the program. As soon as we know you're on the line, we will connect you with a loudspeaker here in the studio, and with our mics we can talk. So we'll have a good dialogue together, Dr. Doze or myself, or both of us with you. So please call in. It makes it more fun for us to get your feedback. Our phone number is 658-5165. 658-5165. I'll repeat the message during the program, so do call. Well, welcome, Dick. Glad to have you here.
Thanks, Lee. I'm pleased to be back.
Yeah.
I'm starting to feel like a familiar fixture here in your studio.
Good. Good.
Yes, and hello everyone out there in television land.
It's amazing to me, Dick. I'm not boasting. It's got nothing to do directly with me. I was just walking down the hall at the medical center here the other day, and a lady was walking in my same direction. She says, I've been seeing you on television. I really like your program. Oh, that's nice. I didn't know who she was. Yeah. And that kind of thing has happened often.
That's sweet.
I don't know about with you, but...
I've had at least one instance where someone came up to me and said that they'd seen me on your program and wanted to ask some questions. So.
You remind me of something to tell our viewers. A number of people do see this program when it's run again, when it's not live, and some people have said, gee, Lee, I wish I could have phoned you, but I knew you weren't there in the studio today. What can we do? So what you can do is to please write us a note here at the studio, Adelphia Cable, and if it's for Dr. Doze, I'll pass it on to him. If it's for me, well, I'll try to deal with it. Give us your name and address, or however you want to do it, email address and telephone number, whatever you like, and we'll respond. This is the Adelphia Cable in I guess it's not South Burlington. Maybe it is.
It is
South Burlington. And so we're not far away. So please write us if you're watching us on a show that's not live. So where would you like? Well, I know where I would like you to begin. Maybe even rephrasing a question instead of using the word God. What age and what circumstances were you aware that there was something in life that wasn't just, how can I put it, involved with it's difficult to phrase it properly. I was going to say something that's not involved with parents or siblings or home or what you wanted or what you didn't want, but to say that isn't really helpful either, because
well, it actually is a good way of putting it, because I think my first sense of a larger dimension.
Mm-hmm. That's a good term, larger dimension.
Yeah, of something fantastic and grand and powerful occurred probably when I was 4,
Mm-hmm.
5 maybe.
Can you tell us this story?
Maybe even younger, sort of like at a time when, time in life when, as a child, I guess you don't think too much about, like you were saying at the start of the show, you don't have a lot of intellectual speculation about the nature of things. You want an egg, you want your mommy, or whatever.
You don't say which came first, the chicken or the egg.
Yeah, but anyway, somehow I lived in the Boston area, as you might tell occasionally from the accent.
Oh, I hadn't thought about that.
I hadn't heard that, huh? Well,
I'm a New Yorker, so I only pick up New York accents.
Boston area kid, and it was hurricane season, apparently. And I remember my grandfather, whom my parents and I lived with, my grandparents when I was a little kid for a while, was boarding up was hammering boards over the windows as we lived near the shore to get ready for this hurricane.
Big storm.
Mm. And I was curious about it. I was quite interested in what it was going to be, and somehow I found myself outside in the beginnings or the middle. I don't know. I don't have a sense of what point in the storm I managed to get outside, but I was outside, and I was absolutely thrilled with the majesty of this storm,
Mm-hmm.
with the power of the storm, with this intensity of wind and sound. And I remember one of my earliest memories in life is I actually went out into the yard, and the winds were very forceful, and I grabbed a hold of a small tree or a lamppost or something, and I was holding on to it, and the wind blew me sideways.
Off, away from the...
I was able to maintain my grip on whatever it was. But I remember riding this wind, holding on to this tree or lamppost, and just feeling like, wow, this is heavenly. I feel like I'm in heaven.
It's like holding on to the mast of a ship.
I love this. I love this storm, this turbulence.
Sure, sure.
And that to me was sort of my first sense of the majesty of something larger.
And it didn't scare you, being large and powerful?
I ate it up. My recollection of it is that it was purely thrilling. And I've always loved storms and winds ever since. I love being in storms. So that's, to me, God is a storm. God is a powerful, God is nature, God is the confluence of it all. God is everything.
Did you associate the storm with God, or
no? Only in retrospect. If someone asked me, you know, what were the early dawnings of my reverential awe, or my sense of diminutiveness in a vast space, and what connects me to this, what makes me feel somehow, you know, involved with it.
The word is awe. You mentioned. I've been reflecting for some years about that term, and it's almost, for many people, it's almost lost in our society. Awe, you know.
Go to Niagara Falls. That's sort of like the storm. I went to Niagara Falls a few years ago with Tony and my wife, and it was sort of reminded me of that. Only though, interestingly, the older I get, the more apprehensive I am about these massive forces. But strangely, when I was a little kid, I didn't have any fear.
Did you take the Maid of the Mist and go?
No, we didn't get down
boat?
under there. Have you done that?
No, my parents did on their honeymoon, and I've had pictures to look at and heard them talk about it. Floating, for those Vermonters who haven't been there, you actually float on the, I guess it's the Niagara River, where
right under the falls.
Right under the falls, and somehow there's enough depth of water, and the current is manageable, so you can actually float a boat and move it around and steer it. And I guess there is a lot of mist from.
Put on rain gear. I
Yes.
remember seeing the people down in there with their rain gear on. But no, we didn't do that. But just the majesty and the power of it made me think of that. How, as I got to be 60 now, I'm a little bit more of a chicken in the wind and the weather than I was when I was 4. Interesting. I didn't have any fear of it. Maybe when you're a child, you're just connected with God and the universe and the power of things, and you don't really have a lot of apprehension.
I would agree there, but I think another aspect which I've been thinking about. I'm 10 years older than you are, pretty much, and so I've been thinking about these things too. I think when you're younger, you have a lot of denial, and you don't have the life experience of knowing people can get hurt, you know, there.
Yes.
You don't.
You're naive.
You're naive. You're really naive.
Right.
And so you'll do almost anything, you know, and sort of enjoy it.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
And I think that's part of it. And also, kids, as you well know, they can fall down and get right back up again. They don't worry about breaking a bone.
True.
They do get broken bones, but not the way people our age do. And so there's more abandon, you know.
Right, abandonment and a pagan quality of being open to everything.
I wouldn't call that pagan. Pagan to me has a negative connotation.
Really?
I mean, not for me personally, but I think for a lot of people, because it means, for many, not Christian, you see. So if you're not Christian, well, there's something wrong with you, you know, and you're a pagan.
I always thought of pagan as being primarily naturalistic and oriented to the rhythms of nature.
I think it's more like kind of pantheistic or something.
Okay, yeah, pagan, pantheistic, yeah. That's the next thought I had, that when I was a student of philosophy, from reading about things, I felt like, well, I must be pantheistic because I don't feel like I connect with the Christian God of my birth, childhood of Roman Catholic training.
Were your parents churchgoers?
Yes, to a certain extent, they were. They sent us anyway, and they seemed to be there periodically. my connections with that kind of upbringing mostly was punishment and harsh terrorizing of the spirit and warnings about damnation and hellfire if wrong thoughts were held, and basically a very unpleasant experience that unfortunately I think is used largely to control and subjugate people's minds at early ages so that they can become malleable participants in a large organization.
Well, not just a large organization, so they'll do what their parents want them to do.
Is that right?
Yes.
Like
I think
you
so.
Scare them into being good girls and boys?
Yes. God is watching. Remember, God is watching. You can't hide from God. And at Christmas time, well, if you've been good, you'll get a present, but otherwise you'll get coal and straw.
Yeah. So they told us that in the church that God was good and God was, we were made in the image and likeness of God. That I always was interested in that notion.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, well, God, if God looks like me and other people, then he must be like us, must be around somewhere. I never could find him.
He must live somewhere around.
He must be. I thought maybe he was just in the trees and in the grass and in the sky, and you could see his face in the clouds, you know, as a child.
As a child, did you think of God as having a face like a human?
Well, they said he was made in the image and likeness of. We were made in his image and likeness. That's one of the phrases I remember from
well, it does say that.
My tutelary years. So I thought, well, if that's so, then maybe he's going to show, he's going to reflect, he's going to be in the wind or in the air or come to the door disguised as a beggar. You know, that's another thing they said. You never know where you're going to see him. He could be the beggar, he could be the dog, or maybe not the dog, but they didn't say that. They didn't relate him to animals, but they used to say that he could be that suffering soul. And if you were kind to that suffering soul, maybe you'd suddenly be realizing that you were holding the hand of God. So there were a lot of sort of images in my childhood about that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And I guess I do tend to think of God as a personal God. But if there is a God, that he's a personal God. That he's personal to everybody.
Some theologians have said, in terms of we're made in God's image, meaning that we're capable of a relationship with God, of knowing God and being known by God. So it's not so much that we have a nose and eyes like God, or God has a nose and eyes like us. More that we're capable of a relationship, a conscious relationship with God. So we can really know God.
Our minds can encompass God.
In some way, obviously, not,
I know
not completely.
I know you've said on other shows that that's beyond the ken of man to actually fathom God, but to have some linkage, some quality of intimacy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If there is a creator, if we were made by somebody, that somebody would probably have an interest in his or her product, wanting to keep tabs on that creation, so that God has an investment in his work.
Yeah, there are some Christian theologians who say that when we really hurt, God hurts. That God really feels and bears our struggle, our pain, our the hell that some of us have to go through. He suffers it with us in empathy and compassion. It's not that he's just sitting up there on his throne eating large, delicious meals every once in a while taking a peek and seeing, oh, isn't that too bad? Look at what's happening down there on Earth.
Yeah.
It goes back to his delightful food and drink. That's a pretty brutal God from my point of view.
Yeah. Well, I sometimes think that God is a, if there is a God, I don't know for sure myself that there is. I don't know that there isn't. But the feeling is that God has an awful lot to do. And that it would be nice if we helped him out every once in a while, or her, for that matter, and do some of his work. I guess that's what you're doing as a career. You're doing, as a life work, you're doing God's work.
You too.
That is a German submarine, isn't it? The U-2? I don't know if I am. I appreciate the thought that I'm.
No, I never had any question, Dick. I mean, you've been a psychotherapist. I mean, you know very profoundly how much pain and suffering and misery that people find within themselves, that they don't know how they got there, but they sure don't like it and they want help.
Yeah. What about that other teaching that God helps those who help themselves?
Sure, but it's a cooperative.
That one too.
Yeah, it's a cooperative thing.
So we're working together.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you would say that with your clients. Yeah. I can't do all the help for you. You've got to help yourself too.
That's true. Now, I don't really have a personal relationship with God. I'd have to confess that. Mm-hmm. Although I don't feel estranged from God, I don't feel as though I'm in any kind of debate or argument about whether God exists or doesn't exist, but I don't feel as though I have a personal relationship with God. My wife, however, does. She has a very close personal relationship with God. And that somehow is inspiring to me.
How has she managed to do that?
It's very personal. I don't know whether she could tell me that, other than to say that she feels the connection, that she actually speaks with, communicates with, receives feedback from, suggestions, advice. It's very personal. She can't show me a tape recording of a conversation that she's had with God, but she feels it strongly that she has.
Yeah, I know people like that. I feel that way myself.
You do?
Yeah. It's not just feelings, but words come into my head that are not my words. I couldn't pick them up on a tape recorder, no. But they're words, and usually they're words that, if it's my projection, my wishful thinking, I wouldn't have said that. I would have conjured up something different. Not that they've been nasty or anything, but it's very perceptive statements and very loving kind of statements.
Well, that's cool. I was raised in a family where one of my uncles was a Catholic priest, and he was around a lot. And he was, I named him Friar Tuck.
That's a good name.
I liked the guy. He carried a cudgel, figuratively
Robin
speaking.
Hood, huh?
Yeah, figuratively speaking. And he was always drumming us kids that we had to be more spiritual, more faithful, more connected with God. And we're going like, well, what? How are we supposed to do that? And he'd say, you're supposed to do that. You're supposed to do that. So I changed the name from Friar Tuck to Tuckle the Turnbuckle. He was always tightening this chain of, you must connect with God.
He didn't give you any help?
Well, he said you go to church and you pray and you confess your crimes and your sins, and you pray for God to come to you. So I remember doing that all the time as a kid, being in church and praying and looking up and going to confession, and I still wasn't sure that there was, the church was pretty, it was beautiful. I loved the smell of the incense and the priest's vestments and
in that beauty,
splendor,
in those smells. Did you have any sense of God's presence?
To me, it was like the natural world. It was like the phantasm of this vast space filled with all these beautiful things, but I wouldn't necessarily say that that's God.
It could be,
or a manifestation
or
of God.
Yeah.
It's just there. But it's like God is something that supposedly you have to qualify in order to connect with. You have to have the right connections. And the church was there, the wind and the weather was there, the beauty of the universe is there, but if nobody said that that was God. They all would say that God was somewhere else. He was behind the scenes, or he was somewhere, and you were supposed to find him. I couldn't find him. So after I was asked to...
How frustrating,
I mean, I didn't...
It's like an Easter egg hunt,
yeah,
but there are no
gee,
clues.
Where is this guy?
No good clues.
So I took the name of Thomas for my my confirmation name in the Catholic ritual procedures, the doubting saint.
That's why you mentioned that to me on the telephone.
Yeah, that I would like to, very much like to connect, but I have...
You'd like to know the way.
I'd like to have a sign.
Let me interrupt you at this point.
Sure.
There's a lot to say.
Yeah.
I want to just tell our viewers that we would like your input. Some of you may have thoughts and feelings similar to what Dr. Doze is expressing. I had a good friend who was a gynecologist, and he said he was a card-carrying atheist, but he didn't behave that way. I always said, no, you're an agnostic. You're a card-carrying agnostic, meaning I don't know. I don't know, yes, that there's a God. I don't know. I wouldn't say, no, there isn't. I'm sort of, don't have enough information. But call us. We'd like to hear from you. We're at 658-5165. 658-5165. Call us and tell us some of your stories and your efforts to find God and how do you find God? Tell us in your own words. Help Dr. Doze here. It's a profound question. It's not simple, and I don't encourage somebody to toss off a trite platitudinous saying, because you're dealing with the marrow of your bones here. It's a heavy, difficult stuff. There's no simple way here. I've asked other people, when you say you thought as a child of God, as a person, well, was it as a man or with the beard, or as a woman, or both, or
just some angelic force of good that would rectify all struggles of the spirit and bring things into harmony through gestures of conciliation and kindness. Sort of like, well, one patterns oneself after what one thinks of as God, in some sense. God is good. Well, try to live a good life, and if there is a God, then you'll find out after you've checked through the turnstile. That's
at
what
the gate with St. Peter.
That's what my uncle actually told me, interestingly enough, towards the end of his life. He was saying he himself, as a priest, a Catholic priest, was not absolutely certain.
He said that.
Was not totally convicted.
After all the turnbuckles that he put on you.
Yeah, well, his favorite poem was The Hound of Heaven. He felt as though he was being pursued by God or drawn to God, but he wasn't sure whether he ever really had done what he was supposed to have done. And he said, I guess the only way I'm going to find out is when I die.
Well, he was an honest man.
Yeah, I mean, had a good, honest relationship with the guy. Very, very good guy. So I went on I sort of was a fallen away Catholic. And then when the Kennedy assassination occurred, I was trying to get back into the church to explain that mess. But I just could never quite stomach Catholicism, given my experience with it. And at some point I was living in Ireland for a year as a visiting lecturer at University College Galway, on a sabbatical from the University of Vermont. And I was in a lot of distress in my relationship with my wife, and I was very unhappy. We were unhappy. And I remember sitting in the kitchen in this rental house in Galway, Ireland, on a very stormy, rainy night, one of my favorite kinds of nights, and asking for a sign. If there is a God, would you please give me some sign? A moment or two after that, there was a knock at the door. Ooh.
Wow.
Nobody else was home but me at the time. I went to the door. There were two young men in shirts and ties with raincoats. And one of them said to me, "We were just driving by here and we had a sense that we should stop."
They said that?
Swear to God. And they were two Latter-day Saints missionaries, Mormon missionaries, young kids from the States who were on their assignment to Ireland to work for a year as is part of the Latter-day Saints
I'm familiar with their requirement here in the States. I didn't know they went there too.
Yeah, they go all over the country, the world, I should say. And I was, of course, so moved and captivated by this. Here was the sign.
Yeah.
I said, okay, well, come on in, guys. And I told them that I had just been praying for a sign, and they thought that was certainly auspicious. So the long and short of it is we spent 6-7 months studying together, and I was visiting their local church, and they actually performed baptisms in our backyard, which abutted on a river. And I remember one baptism ceremony done where there was a full immersion baptism, and simultaneously with the pronouncing of the baptism, words of several swans flew into the area and landed adjacent to the scene of the baptism.
Profound.
Very natural, very sort of like the natural world again. That's another example to me of an experience of God in nature and in the natural phenomenal world, things as they are. Some months later, when the crisis moment came, when I was to find out whether I would become a Latter-day Saint, we'd studied the Book of Mormon and been to prayer meetings, and they came to the family and spoke with the family. One of the reasons that my wife didn't like it was because they didn't treat women well in their hierarchy there. And she said, "I'm not buying in anything that doesn't give women the rights." Like, you know,
yeah, of course.
The high point of women's activism. And of course, that was I couldn't argue with that. But then they said, we'll get on our knees together in the front room of the house, myself and these two guys, Applegate and Corley were their names. And you've been studying, you've been praying, you want this to happen. Now this is the chance you have to have a direct connection with God, because that's how they work it. If you don't get the direct lightning bolt connection, then you don't sign the book. And I was on my knees praying.
Nothing happened.
Nothing.
Of course, there was
just open space.
But you had been distracted from receiving a lightning bolt because of their attitude about women. You know, that
maybe not. I don't think that was it. I don't think I was selling them out. I could see where my wife would sell them out, but I wasn't necessarily selling them out. I was saying, well, you know, if there's more to it than that, you know, if it is that the man must rule and be the kingpin, and the woman is subjugated to his directive, then okay, well, I mean, if that's the rule of God, and that's what it says in the Bible, and that's what the strict interpretation of it in Baptist scriptures and playouts. I recently went to a Baptist revival with a friend of mine who's a Baptist minister in Alabama for 5 days, and they made it very clear that the woman's role is to be secondary to the man. At any rate, I don't think that was it. I think I was really wanting, and particularly given that they had come out of the blue. I mean, those guys were tuned in enough. They were tuned into my need somehow. You know?
They were. They were.
They get assigned to stop there.
Yeah, it sounds like God
works in strange and mysterious ways.
Well, no one will question that, Dick.
So maybe he can't be pinned down and put into any particular church or body or group. Maybe what it is one's openness to the Spirit, to be touched, to be guided, to be led, but not to have. You don't have to have an institutional form to affirm it. As I concluded probably in my early 30s that it's not so much God as a problem, but those who claim to represent Him.
That's true. That's true.
And we're all fallible as humans, and not to blame the frailties of others, but basically I think I've concluded that the connection with God is totally available 24 hours a day, and God doesn't care whether you call Him through a Lutheran or an Abyssinian or a Baptist or any rule whatsoever. There's no separation.
No.
And that's where I think that's where I developed my interest in Buddha Dharma, which avers that there is no separation between this and that, and everything is interdependently originated, and that if God is part of it, then He's part of it.
Do you want to tell our viewers a little bit about Bodhidharma? But maybe I want to hold off on that, because I had one interpretation about what you were asking from God. And then let's go to Bodhidharma. Perhaps the answer to your prayer when you were kneeling down there in Ireland was to meet some people who had a depth of commitment, who weren't racked by doubt and still struggling with proof. And that's why they were sent to you, to learn how they could do that. What enabled them to make that kind of a commitment. Not necessarily that was the commitment for you. I mean, it could have been, or maybe not. But the essence of your struggle was, how do you believe? How do you find a sign? How do you know that God is aware of you and loves you in some kind of perhaps objective way? And there you were asking for that, and pow, right away.
Hallelujah.
Right away, your prayer was answered. So it didn't mean that you should necessarily become a Mormon, or if they were Episcopalians or whatever coming by and they came in. That wasn't the issue. The issue was, that wasn't even your question. What church or what religion should I belong to? It was, show yourself in some way, God.
Yeah, He did.
And He did. God did show Himself to you.
He did.
And and with not just with a feeling or some thoughts in your head or words in your head, but with actual knock on the door.
Yeah, that's true. I have to admit that.
And the two young men said the same thing. We were just driving along, and we weren't planning to visit you at all.
Right. They were headed down the highway.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, that's true. Corley and Applegate.
So,
that's true. I don't think I've had a problem with God ever since then.
So you had a sign.
He showed Himself to me.
Yeah, you had a sign.
That's true.
No question about it.
That's
but it didn't mean that you necessarily should go the whole way with the persons who came in the door. Maybe you should. Maybe you shouldn't. Well, you know how it is in therapy. You're working with somebody.
That's interesting.
They say, well, doctor, should I do this or should I do that?
Yeah, that's interesting.
And I'm sure you would say, well, I can't tell you what to do. You have to make that decision. Here are some of the options. Here are some of the choices. I think these are some of your motivations. But ultimately, the choice is yours. And I can't make it for you.
Yeah.
God works the same way.
Hallelujah.
Yes. So your prayer was answered. So then the question is, now I know God hears my prayer. I know God gives a damn. Now what do I do with that knowledge and that experience?
Yeah.
And I don't know what you should have done. You tried it out in the most obvious way, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it didn't work. But your question was answered.
Yep.
So now what? And again, sounding like the therapist Dick Does, I can't tell you what. I can tell you where you've been and what you're looking for, and according to your data. But how you put it together it's nothing I can do.
Yeah, well, I think what I was looking for at that time was a rescue remedy,
Okay.
a rescue mission. And these guys showed up, and they were there to try to rescue me from myself.
True, that was their agenda. That's what they were being trained to do, really.
Your comments are suggestive of the complexities of the question of how one actually thinks about or imagines relating with God, or so many levels of
Absolutely.
To the question. That part of my struggle was with my childhood version of what I thought God was supposed to be,
Okay.
and my resentment, perhaps, that God had not taken better care of me.
Wasn't the way he was
Or the way I thought he was supposed to be. So coming to some kind of ground of peace with the whole question of oneself and the world, and being able to relax and feel saved from one's inner tortures, I think probably is what it would mean to me today. Being saved is being relieved of the burden of one's tortured mind, and perhaps less than optimal behavior in life. If I can get to a place in my life where I have the peace that surpasses all understanding, as they say in the scriptural realm, maybe that comes from really realizing that there is a concerned power in the universe that does not turn a blind eye to those who seek succor from it.
Well, it was your phrase you used earlier on our program today. It wasn't God, it was another word which I liked.
Reverential awe?
No, it was before that, but anyway, you know basically what I'm saying. Now I can't remember where I was going to go with that, but
well, that's what happens a 60 and a 70-year-old guy sitting down talking, I can't remember where we're going with this stuff. But we're relatively at peace. You feel pretty much at peace in life. I get that feeling from you.
Yeah. But God, in my experience, I'll tell you, for our viewers, if you will, if you put up with the personal story, I was on an 8-day silent retreat with the Jesuits at Gloucester, Massachusetts, where I like to go. And somewhere during the retreat, I was outside praying, and I've discovered God does answer. Let's not say, maybe not use answer. God will speak to you, and so not that you can hear him, and that with the tape
like
recorder,
an extra voice,
but you hear words addressed to you, very clear words that are not just my mind whirling around, nothing like that at all, and so I was outside there, and I said, okay, God, you know how much difficulty I have with my eyesight, and how I've been to the best doctors probably in the world, and they have no answer to help me see better. When you have severe glaucoma, open-angle glaucoma is what I suffer from, there is no way to cure it. All you can do is to keep you from getting worse, and losing more eyesight. So now I know you can do anything. I know you've made this huge ocean that I see right before me, the Atlantic Ocean. I know you've made everything, the whole universe, the stars, the planets. So, and I know if you wished, if you wanted to, you could heal me and give me back my vision, 2020.
Yeah.
So please do.
Yes.
And I was addressing God like that. I said, please, please do. And right away the words came to my head, I already have. And I thought, no, whoa. Wait a minute, you already have. So I checked my vision. There was some faraway sailboat out there on the ocean. It was quite blurry. I wasn't even sure it was a sailboat, not a wave. I thought, no, it's, if you have, I can't tell, Lord. So then I thought about the significance of his statement, and I use his,
Right,
could be his,
gender-free.
Yeah. It's obviously God doesn't have testes and shave every day. I mean, so so I thought about it. I thought, well, maybe what God means in terms of healed me, what he is saying is that I'm not blind. I get around with difficulty, but I can't drive a car. But I'm not blind, and a lot of dangers and problems that my eyes have given me, I've been able, with God's grace and the surgeon's expertise, to weather, to live with.
Yes.
And they have some kind of partial healing anyway. So I said, so then after I processed it in my mind a little bit, maybe like on this Millionaire show, how they'll process different choices to how to answer. So then I said, okay, God, I hear what you're saying. But look, I see that and I'm grateful for it. I really am. I mean, I could have just lost all my vision. However, why not heal me all the way so I'm 20/20 in both eyes? I know you can do that, and I know that's possible, and it would be wonderful. And how about that? And almost immediately, God's words that came into my head were, quote, "My grace is sufficient for you," unquote.
Hallelujah.
I mean, that was God. There was no question about it. I mean, if it were me, I would have said, go to Lourdes, or or find yourself a faith healer somewhere, or go and, I don't know, do something else that would make it happen. But
it's very touching.
Yeah, true. And so he didn't say everything will be fine.
Right.
He didn't say I'll fix you up. He didn't say you'll get worse. He just said my grace is sufficient for you.
Right. Yeah, that reminds me of the complexity of that we can't really ask questions that are based on a materialist view of how things should be.
Yeah. You want to say more about that, Dick?
Speaking for myself, that I tend to, any arguments I have had about whether there's a God or not a God has always been from the standpoint of materialism. Like, show me the money.
Yep.
And that's very trivial in a way.
Ultimately, it is.
Yeah. And your comment about hearing the response to your plea is that that my grace is sufficient to you. Well, it was really very spacious and touching, and just hearing it gave me a feeling of peace.
Well, thank you. And God's first response about, I already have.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have said that. If
Right, no.
No way. If that was Lee Udell in some weird way talking to himself, no, I wouldn't have said that.
Yeah. I think that what got me into the Buddhist version
Tell us about that.
of things has to do with Buddhism as I originally encountered it, was speaking against spiritual materialism.
Mm-hmm.
That my teacher, Buddhist teacher, the Tibetan meditation master named Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, wrote a book actually called Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, which maybe is another thing that I needed to hear, as I continue to need to hear, to not be caught up in the material world, the material interpretation of things. And most of my complaints have to do with material things, even though it might be physical material, like health. Our concerns about our physical health is a material concern.
Sure.
Our monetary needs is a material concern. Our relationship needs is a material concern. Almost all of our human concerns are materially based. So it's easy to get that confused into thinking that that's the level that, quote, God should be operating on, when in fact that's an illusion.
Close human relationships are material?
Well, if your relationship isn't working the way you want it to be working, and you say, God, fix my relationship for me.
Gotcha.
That's sort of like, at that level, it's a materialistic request.
Get out your screwdriver, God, and
right.
please.
Exactly.
Or I need
Make an
another
adjustment. Fix it for me, so I don't have to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, as a professional psychotherapist, you would never tell a client, I'll fix it for you.
No, it's easy, but it's so easy to be able to tell other people, to advise other people properly, but not yourself.
Absolutely.
Was it the lawyer who has himself for a client, has a fool for a client, a physician who tries to treat himself, although they say, physician, heal thyself. It's hard to treat yourself sometimes.
It is.
Even if you're as smart as you think you might. Even if you think you're smart. That's a lesson I have to learn over and over again.
Excuse me for
Surely.
1 second. I want to move on with Buddhism, but we're still looking for someone to phone in. Our number is 658-5165. Do you want to invite someone to phone in yourself? Maybe that will get them to go walk the phone.
Person?
No, just...
Oh, please, ladies and gentlemen, give us an inquiry. Give us a repost. Give us a commentary from your own personal experience. It's we're all in this boat together, and nobody has all the answers. So
5 minutes late.
we'd love to hear from you if you're out there. Maybe we can all connect together and experience an open connection with the loving force, whatever you want to call it. A rose by any other name remains a rose.
Yeah.
So what is it in the Jewish traditions? They don't even refer to. They don't think that they have the audacity to refer to God in the Orthodox traditions.
With a name.
That you can't put a name on this power, this force.
It's true.
That probably the biggest challenge I've had in my life is to develop more humility about it. To really develop humility, which is another area where Buddhism has helped me, because it's a very humble set of teachings. And so if God made the Buddhist teachings available to me, I'm thankful.
What are you finding in them, and in your experience?
Essentially, that they give you the answers that you get the answers that you need. Sort of like you're issuing a prayer, you got the answer that you needed. In meditation, it's sort of like a prayer where you're whatever questions you have, you bring them up in your meditation, and you wait for an answer.
What kind of answers does a Buddhist get?
Just like you said.
Really?
Just like that sort of thing, like this question has already been answered, or you need to look a little deeper.
A voice speaks to you in your head.
You hear something back. You actually hear something back. And in the Buddhist tradition, they wouldn't say it was God. They would say it's merely your own intelligence. It's sort of like the whole universe is intelligence in the Buddhist tradition,
Mm-hmm.
which you could say is another way of construing God. And Buddhism cuts through the quandary of feeling as though you're separate from things.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm here and God is out there. That was always a struggle for me.
Yeah, as though God lived off in
He's
some throne somewhere in heaven.
Right. He's interwoven into everything, and that's pantheism in a way too.
Nah, not technically. Pantheism says nature is God and God is nature, that they're one, but God doesn't exist separate from his creation.
That's what pantheism is?
Mm.
I see. So it does imply that God doesn't exist separate from his creation, whereas Christianity implies that God does exist separate from his creation. Right. Yeah, well, I don't feel any need to think of God as separate from his creation anymore. That was always my struggle, and in the Buddhist teachings and understanding of Christianity in a different way has given me peace.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't know whether it's indestructible peace, but relative peace. I don't know if I don't think I have experienced absolute peace.
Well, separateness from
topic for another show, maybe.
Yes.
Must God be separate?
I mean, ultimately.
Yeah.
Well, there's some anthropomorphic ways of thinking about God that way. It's sort of like God is existing in his castle and his palace, and he says, gee, I'm getting kind of lonely living here by myself. Of course, in Christian theology, and I guess Jewish as well, there are angels and archangels, and so I guess God isn't completely alone. I mean, there are angels, archangels, cherubim, seraphim, all kinds of other kinds of creatures we don't know anything about, but they're mentioned anyway, for whatever that means. And so but anyway, God says, I think I want to do something. I want to create a universe and planets and stars and cosmic dust and people, that you can, just people who can hug and laugh and kiss and sadly kill, and who can reproduce and have generation upon generation. I think I'll do that. So,
that's the anthropomorphic.
Anthropomorphic picture of God doing that. But you almost are stuck with that if you can think of God as ever being separate from creation. Oh, I have a sure feeling that our creation here today is about over. We only have about a minute left. So I appreciate your being here, Dick. I've had a good time. I hope you have too.
Oh yeah, I always have a good time with you, Lee.
Thank you, thank you. Well, you gave me something to think about, just
and vice versa.
What we were just talking about now.
Must God be separate?
Yeah, and so I ask our viewers, if you have questions, thoughts, ideas, objections, angry feelings, whatever, write me, the Reverend C. Leland Udell at Adelphia Studios here. Can't remember the name of the road, but I never can remember our road. But anyway, it's in the phone book, Adelphia Cable, channel